Here we are, officially starting IG Live, The Actor Overcomes, and today, on a Goofy Thursday, is Assess the Player. Now, on its face, you guys, this seems like something that you kind of do the dog thing, right? You kind of go, what is he talking about? And yet, ironically, if you're an ambitious person, and especially as we slowly come out of the pandemic for the last 2 years, our lives are eventually going to get back to where, everything or a lot of things, certainly 75% of it, are in person again. I think that maybe, a good percentage, maybe a quarter or a third will never go back to being in person just in general because it doesn't have to. But we are going to get back to that place. I'm sure your social life and your social agenda has changed a little bit in the course of 2022, now that we're in June. So the thing is that when you talk about assess the player, it comes from a very common, normal place, and that is the word networking, which is obviously, you guys, a very, very popular subject, and yet also a severe conundrum for us. Even, Alana, you're exceptionally gregarious, and Paul, you're very well spoken, and Michael, you're a very outward person. Y'all don't have any issue with chatting with folks, and obviously, nor did I. However, there isn't any clarity with what drives us in a conversation when we're out, either expectedly because we know the location that we're going to be in, and therefore we know we're going to encounter an industry person, or you're someplace where you couldn't think for the life of you that you would wind up standing near, talking with, in a group, small group, one-on-one, whatever, that you would encounter somebody. What's up, Merrick? Welcome in, bro. That you would encounter somebody in this profession that all of a sudden you would necessarily need to assess. Now, there's an important distinction in this for everybody, especially for those who are not seeing this live, who watch this later. Please note the title of today's IG Live. It says, Assess the Player. It doesn't say judge. It doesn't say decide. It doesn't say final. It doesn't say any of those things. It says assess, which is what I had to learn very quickly for the ambitious guy that I was, and even to this day, because of the fact that we are in a extraordinarily subjective profession as opposed to an objective profession. We are left with a lot of intangibles as it relates to people. Now, we don't like the word profiling for whatever reason. Yet, at the same time, as human beings, y'all know it and I know it. You've been profiling people since you were 4 years old. Yes, that's what it is. We profile people when it comes to dating. We profile people when it comes to being in a new city. We profile people when it comes to being colleagues at work. This is, again, lends itself over to the concept of tribalism. But, guys, I lived in 19 places by the time I was 21. I had to get pretty good at this shit. Hey, Mickey, great to see you, love. I had to get good at the concept of profiling, and if you don't like profiling, just stick with the word assess. But what we're doing with that is we are filtering information, and we're filtering three things: what we see, what we hear, and what they do. Those are the things that we're assessing. That's why the title of this is Assess the Player. Now, let me go ahead and say this up front because I need to say this earlier than later into this conversation. And I need to address this now. And the irony is we have, two women here. Ladies, and again, it's happened to me as well as a man, but yes, it's far more common for women. When I'm discussing assess the player and I use dating analogies that we've all done in social circumstances, bars, restaurants, events, etc. in our lives, in this particular IG Live, I cannot go down the road of what you guys may commonly experience, which is either being judged as a female and or constantly hit on. I get that happens. I will make a very simple, what's going on with my hair today? I'll make a very simple statement that I've said for years. I personally, if I were a female, would always say to somebody when I'm hit on either appropriately or inappropriately, but simply not interested, I would just say, that's very great. Thank you very much. It's a lovely compliment. I'm currently in the greatest relationship of my life, but anyway, back to what we were talking about, and just change the subject and move on. That's my general statement about being hit on, but that happens when you're networking. It happens when you encounter an industry player. So it happens when you're trying to assess the player. But I don't want to convolute that with today's conversation. I just don't. I have to be careful about that. Hey, Alice, welcome in. Be sure you go back and watch the beginning of this on the grid and or over on the YouTube channel, just so I don't want to confuse anybody. So let's just understand that assessing somebody is something we've been doing our whole lives. Some of us are really good at it in certain circumstances, and some of us really suck at it in other circumstances. And what I have found, nothing against our community, oh my goodness, we know we're in trouble when my cousin shows up to a Kevin IG Live. Holy shit balls. This is what I want to share with us about our community. One of the challenges with assessing the player is that we are, yes, and I've said it many times, and we are, unless you're a star, unless you're an offer-only person, we are at the bottom of the totem pole in terms of the old Alfred Hitchcock thing of disliking actors and the last thing considered, and yet probably the most important thing on a set. I get that. And because of that, when we're out engaging with people and we encounter somebody who claims to be, and I'm never saying claims to be by meaning that they're lying. I don't. Claims to be a producer, writer, director, or as I said recently in an IG Live and made a joke out of it from the 90s, I'm a producer with several projects in various stages, which means absolutely nothing unless you get more information. And that's no different than assessing an apartment, assessing a house, assessing a car, assessing a purchase, assessing a trip. This is all just simply about information. The unfortunate part for us, you guys, is that the information we gather as actors about the players on the other side of the desk is that it could be incredibly valid and incredibly terrific, and yet it still hasn't been what they'd say in financial investment terms, stock terms. It isn't necessarily realized yet. And that's the challenge for us, you guys, is that I'm trying to get people to get better at assessing so that you can place them, because of course that would go on your master contact list, Kevin Land, if you were to meet someone and talk to them, so that you properly and appropriately track them as a professional industry contact going forward. That's what assessing the player is about. So that you just don't rush with emotion or rush with, I still believe in a place called Ho. Y'all, I'm all for Ho. Okay, sorry, bad Clint impression. There you go. Well, it's not that bad. So I'm all about hope, you guys, and that's what I want to see you guys work with. But I want you to assess the player so that you don't jump too far, too fast, say something inappropriate, do something inappropriate, and or simply hope too inappropriately for too long. That's all this is about. I mean, y'all, I was like a Labrador puppy when I moved to California. Man, I was running around talking to everybody, shaking all sorts of hands, kissing babies. Well, probably not babies, but kissing somebody. And I was really terrific at it. And then there were instances in which I was, bad song, blinded by the light. And that's always my concern. My concern is that we get blinded by the hope. We get blinded by the subjectivity because we're not actually paying attention to the concept of what we naturally do when we start working at a new company, when we're someplace out and we're taking note from a dating standpoint of who we might be interested in talking to, or who would be, we hope, has an interest in talking to us, either direction, and or what you might do if you find yourself in an unfamiliar neighborhood and your car is broken down. That's why I use the word profiling. We've been doing it our whole lives. We just don't do it particularly well as actors because we're on such the short end of the stick, and we want to believe this next person, this next thingy that I encountered is my shot at the title. It's a phrase I use all the time. I should make a hashtag out of it. I've been saying my shot at the title since 1992. And again, I completely get it. But this is why we have to, in certain moments, take a breath, go to the bathroom, step outside, breathe, and remember this IG Live, because there's just too much subjectivity in this entire game. So a couple of things to help out with on this is, as we do, and we do this in our lives anyway, is make sure that you're not just hearing what someone says to you in a conversation or in a small group conversation while you're listening to them. Make sure you hear them. Really hear the specifics of the stuff they're talking around or talking about. Because Hollywood, globally, doesn't matter, France, Australia, makes no diff. Globally is one of my favorite things of talking about, if, maybe, when, then. Look at how many times somebody qualifies or puts a disclaimer on the language that they say. It doesn't make it bad, but again, we're just talking about assessing, y'all. We're not talking about a final judgment. We're not talking about a zero-sum game. We're not talking about that. We're just talking about you encountering somebody with a good assessment of the truth of who they are. Okay? So also listen, but hear what it sounds like they're promoting. Now, I don't mean promote in the way you think of it. I don't mean marketing. It's not how I mean it. I just mean that somebody who's trying to be a BS player in Hollywood, and again, Hollywood, transcendent, metaphorical for the whole world. Someone who's trying to be a player, maybe they are trying to use that to get laid. Maybe they are trying to do it to try to act like alpha male or female in a room or a group. I don't care their reasoning. Just be aware of what it seems to be that they're promoting, whether it's their own fabulousness or it's something that they're doing. Just make sure you take note if that comes out in rando convo, okay? And here's the kicker of number 3 about assessing. Based on the first 2 things I've said, we all know there would be something common people would talk about. So also make sure you pay attention to, based on the first 2, what they don't say. Because a lot of times, it's a country song. Sorry. It's not what I did, it's what I didn't do. A lot of times, the actual best part of assessing somebody in this profession who is, either an actor who's espousing, but more notably producer, director, writer, showrunner, supposed blah, whatevs, is by what they don't say. And again, I'm going to use a dating analogy because I've been doing it for years, in that I assure you, and I already know that Lord knows Alana, she's going to make a comment on this. Lord knows as ladies, when you go on dates, if a guy's trying to or believes that he should be able to impress you by either kind of dancing around how much money he makes, which is usually stated by some sort of things that they own, they'll find ways to mention their car or mention trips they've been on or where they live or how they live, whatever. Okay? Again, this is human nature. This is what we do as humans to try and, for lack of a better phrase, what dogs do, piss on a fire hydrant and make our mark or leave our mark. This is common. All genders, all sexual orientations, humans do it, period. So the key is I want you to pay attention to it. The problemski is, here's the problemski today. Back in the day, and Alana, I've already said this about the 90s, right? Back in the day, this was actually much easier. Now, it's a complete train wreck. And the reason for it is this. Back in the day, basically when you encountered somebody, when you look again, always make sure you're always functioning in this business from the 2 groups that I've assessed. And you'll find it all over the Q-tips on my YouTube channel. Make sure you always understand. You have agents, managers, and casting directors over here in this group that have to deal with actors all the time. And then you have what I call the others. Okay? But they're actually the people who run this profession, right? The executive producers, the writers, the showrunners, studios, networks, blah, blah, blah. Well, back in the day, it was much more simple because you were either legitimately doing some form of an independent production, but the way things worked back then, which were much more black and white and took a much larger period of what we would call development time and pre-production time, that if you were imminently doing a commercial and it was legitimate, you'd have a start date. You'd know when you were doing that. You certainly would with a feature film, and you certainly would if it was a studio feature film. You'd even have a distribution deal. Even if you were doing an independent production back then that was scale or above, if you were talking about it, they would probably be saying, yeah, we have so-and-so attached, and they'd say some celebrity's name. That was much more common. So you either had studio features or legit celebrity-attached independent features, or you had production dates, or you had a distribution deal, and or your TV show was actually going to be a pilot. Assessing somebody for where they actually stood in this profession was much easier. Plus, back then, you could just look that shit up on Variety or the Hollywood Reporter production charts and find that project or find that thing in the production charts. And if it was a commercial and the shoot was anywhere within a couple of weeks, there probably was already an audition for it back then. So it was much easier. But now we live in digital train wreck land. And digital train wreck land means that even some of the most legitimate people you may encounter, especially considering where you are in your career, folks you would very much want to track or stay after or stay in touch with or send marketing material to as an actor. Nowadays, man, what does that person look like or sound like at a Starbucks, at a party, at an event, at a thing? I mean, trying to assess the player today for whatever degree of professionalism and integrity, and as I always say, legitimate production activity. Legitimate actor activity. Whatever the word legitimate means to you, that's not my job. You are allowed to change the levels and filter of what you consider to be legitimate actor stuff for you. It's not for me, okay? Because you may be non-union right now, eventually not. Or you may be staunchly union. Or you may be one of those people that I wish hadn't but has chosen to become FICOR. So I can't tell you what legitimate is to you. I can only tell you that the assess the player conversation is all about the fact that you constantly are looking to add people to your master contact list that have encountered you in person. But in doing that, that going forward from that moment, you're not putting yourself mentally, psychologically, or emotionally in a position of putting too many eggs or too much hope into where that person is at this moment in time. And of course, as we all know, with the word viral, or with where we are simply today with the craziness of productions, that wouldn't have necessarily happened overnight. I mean, back in the day, and again, this is how old I am, I can tell you right now, going all the way back to Dramalog, I remember the Blair Witch Project being in Dramalog. Literally, y'all, I remember the listing being there. But back in the day, whether it was Blair Witch Project or Bring It Forward to Chasing Amy or Bring It Forward to Paranormal Activity, any of those things that were suddenly somebody went from blah to blah overnight, people can argue that that happens in smaller increments all the time now, more often than it did back then. It just doesn't happen, didn't happen much back then, that somebody went from complete anonymity to a 3-picture deal. And now there are so many platforms, so many outlets, so many people doing stuff because we have a phone that has the camera lens that's better than most of the film lenses that got used many moons ago. Assessing the player now takes on a different light. It just does. And it's much harder to do, and that's one of the reasons why I encourage you guys to really pay attention to what someone doesn't say. And here's the wrinkle. And the wrinkle is going to depend on, obviously, the scenario. Again, Kevin is the guy who trademarked audience, environment, intent, AEI. All of life is based on who's your audience, where are you, and what is your intent. Okay, reverse that for them. Who's their audience? Where are you? And what do you think their intent is? Are they just trying to be full of bluster? Is it just actually a fair, normal conversation in which they're just discussing what's going on in their world? No different, if I just said, listen, I was just, one of the final choices for a Travolta film, that could sound like bluster to someone, or for me, it could just be a fact. I didn't get it, but this could just be a fact. So this is where we have to assess. And if you have the moment to, if there's a crease, if there's a wrinkle, if there's an angle, and you were truly listening to what they said and really heard it, and what it seems they're promoting, then I basically have just listed for you in this IG Live some of the things you might ask them. If someone claims to be a representative, cool, but they haven't said the name of the company, ask them the name. If somebody claims to sound like they want to be a really, really smart, cool, sharp representative, cool, ask them how long they've been in the business. Where else have they been a part of and or worked at? If somebody says they're in casting, are they a casting director, associate, or assistant? What projects have they actually worked on? I mean, I'd love to look you up on IMDb. What's your full name again? I mean, guys, there's 1,000 ways to do this in terms of, getting additional information. But that becomes a key part of the assessment also sometimes, are the questions that you ask. Otherwise, guys, we wouldn't have panels at the Television Academy, and we wouldn't have all these things where we get to ask people questions. We wouldn't have the Actors Studio Q&A historical, reality of what they've presented on camera over the years if asking questions was somehow wrong. Actors are so typically, not always, but typically very scared to ask questions or feel that they're putting someone on the spot. Well, personally for Kevin, I tend to believe and feel that that's much more how you ask the question, and then in a particular conversation or an environment that you're in when you ask the question. But asking questions, guys, hey man, this has always been one of my points. If you don't have anything to hide, then getting asked a question shouldn't be a difficult problem for you. And this is also part of how you assess somebody, man. I mean, I see it all the time where we've reached a place in this world because of digital technology, in my opinion, where the female gender who actually is interested in men has gotten to the place where they commonly start out with, are you married? Do you really have a girlfriend? I mean, these are, personal questions, and they're sort of typically done with an interrogation element to them. Why? Because so many of my gender spent so many decades lying about it. That's why. And we all know no one in Hollywood has ever lied about their actual standing or status regarding something. Bullshit. Of course they have. So again, I'm not telling you that you shouldn't talk to people. And I'm not telling you that you should let what you assess become solidified. It's just an assessment in the moment. Because it was easier for me back in the day when I met people. Because even though we didn't have IMDb the way we had it, and we didn't have Google the way we had it, we did have mechanisms. We had the Hollywood Creative Directory. We had trade papers. There were ways to confirm, and also no one did things, by Zoom or by IG Live. So people were in offices. I could find your ass or not if you were lying. So there's a lot that the digital world has provided us, and there's a lot that the digital world has caused us to have to be better at. And I actually think that assessing the player has now become one of the hardest things that we would have to do, because there's so much out there that is legitimate but doesn't have a big pre-production schedule. Didn't have to be in development for 6 or 7 or 8 months. It didn't have to do any of that. And so understanding, you guys, that assessing something becomes a little more difficult. But at bare minimum, try to get somebody's full name. At bare minimum, try to get somebody's company name. Try to get the name of the project or anybody else that they're working with, and or a little bit of what someone's, hey Mel, someone's historical, happy birthday recently, by the way, someone's historical recent background. I mean, that's all you can try and get out of somebody when you're listening to them espouse or chat or whatever. And at the end of the day, you guys, honestly, it's a normal conversation. If you started working at a new office and, you wind up in the break room, or as we always just called it, the metaphorical water cooler is what we called it, back in my day, you would ask these same questions of people. This isn't abnormal. Again, you don't rapid fire, boom, boom, boom. You're not playing a cop, and this is not an interrogation. You have to have some je ne sais quoi as to how you present this in a conversation, especially if it's a group conversation. And sometimes if it's a group conversation or a dinner party or a small event or some shit like that, small screening, sometimes other people will do your work for you. All you have to do is pay attention. But you definitely want to sharpen, that's the point of this IG, you want to sharpen your skill set for assessing the player. Now, as I set it up today, I'm now going to go straight into and go to doing what I call show business scenarios, ask me anything, but we're not quite at the 30-minute mark for assess the player. So before I do that, and as a setup to that, before I kind of take a breath and a hard line through that, I got to run, man. Be great. Thanks, Merrick. Be good. Does anybody have a question, situation, or just a pure question about assess the player that's on your mind? Yeah, I know. But I know Alana, but I'm not calling it issue time because that's something that was easier back in the day with the Actors Network when we all hung out and knew each other. Issue time freaks people out as a phraseology, so I'm not using that. But does anybody here have anything they want to ask about assess the player? And if you guys don't have anything for showbiz scenarios today, it's more than fine. I just decided today to do them back to back. But again, as I'm saying, and that's why I'm saying it, so it's on the actual edited version of the IG Live that goes over to YouTube. I am mixing up now what I do during the week. It's no longer just Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 9 o'clock. I'm going to probably play around with 10:30, 3 p.m., and 6 p.m. PST so that I'm able to service different people's schedules and also people in different parts of the country and the world. And I'm also only going to do one set subject like this, assess the player a week, and I'm probably going to be doing 2 or 3 showbiz scenarios, open forum, ask me anything. So we're closing in on the actual 30-minute line. I don't see anybody writing me a question about assess the player. So just make sure as we wrap that up that you understand. Listen to what they say, what they promote, and what they don't say, and get better and smarter at asking questions, well-timed questions, in those encounters. And again, once you've assessed someone, it's not a final decision, but do let it govern how much hope and immediate future things that you think may befall that encounter, and or just keeping up with somebody as time goes by down the road, which obviously, if they're really legitimate, is so easy to do today on social media and or with Google. So, okay, with that said, that's going to officially wrap this IG Live, The Actor Overcomes, Assess the Player. Now, I'm going to take 1 minute, I'm going to breathe, y'all breathe, and I will come back and start show business scenarios. If you can't stay, don't want to stay, go ahead and go. If you got stuff, get ready to type it into so I can address them, okay?